Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be talking about The Walkthrough by Doug Walsh. Also, I just want to apologize for the stock footage here. I'm going through a bit of a move and I don't have my cameras and everything set up, so yeah, I'm just going to try it this way and see how it goes. So, The Walkthrough is a book that I didn't really know that I wanted to read. It's one of those really interesting topics where you get it and you're not really sure about it, and then you start reading and it's just incredibly fascinating. So, in the book, Doug talks about how he got started as a writer of strategy guides. And yeah, it's pretty great. I didn't know a whole lot about the business of writing strategy guides, and I started doing guides myself, but I never did them in like a book format. The stuff that I write is usually like really simple guides, what like if it's a puzzle or something like that within a game. I've never written a strategy guide for an entire game. So reading about Doug's experiences, it's pretty awesome. The book made me think about just, when I was growing up and we didn't really have strategy guides back then unless you had a subscription to Nintendo Power and the specific game that you had rented was in that issue of Nintendo Power, or if you knew a friend who had like collected and saved all of their different magazines up to that point, then you could get a strategy guide. Otherwise, you were kind of on your own to figure this stuff out, or you needed to find a friend who had previously rented or owned the game and they knew how to get through certain things. And, Doug talks about how things kind of changed, like from when he was writing books to the internet really coming around and that sort of thing. We'll get into that later. So Doug talks about how he got his start with this and how it kind of happened with a bike accident. So he was riding his bicycle, got into an accident, and was kind of laid up for a while and got a gift card to I'm gonna mess this up. I keep wanting to say Funko Land, but I think it was a GameStop. He went in there, saw an advertisement for writing game guides, and he took a chance on it. And it turns out it was a guy looking for independent contractors to start writing game guides and probably writing other online content as well. Doug talks about how he got his start like right at the tail end of the .com boom. So there were a lot of websites looking for online content, that sort of thing. And they were paying big money for it because a lot of these companies thought, hey, this is the next big thing, so we can get a lot of startup money. And people were dumping a lot of money into these sites, so you could make quite a bit while you were doing it. He also brings up how he wanted to write for Nintendo when he was a kid. He wanted to write in Nintendo Power and that kind of thing. And yeah, I think a lot of kids wanted to do that. I know I had a friend of mine who wanted to work at Nintendo, and yeah, that never happened. But he would talk about it a lot. He was our resident Nintendo fanboy. It was kind of interesting to get that perspective from him, and to kind of hear about how Doug wanted to work for them when he was a kid. And he eventually got his chance to do that when one contract came up. He was working for Brady Games, which was one of the two big strategy guide publishers that I knew about. There was Prima, and then there was Brady Games, and those were the two that I always remember seeing in, Electronics Boutique, Funko-Land, and GameStop whenever I would go game hunting. And yeah, it's kind of weird when I think about the strategy guide industry from back then. Doug talks a little bit about it, and he mentions a bunch of other strategy guide companies that I had never heard of before. And I thought maybe it might be interesting at some later time to go and look those up. But for right now, we're just gonna stick with Doug and his story. So after the dot-com bubble burst and a lot of the contracts and everything that Doug had started drying up, he kind of worked his way into Brady Games, mostly through networking and that kind of stuff. But he ended up as kind of a full-time writer there. It sounds like it was still a group of independent contractors, but they all had signed contracts with Brady Games. And that's kind of something that's pretty cool when I think about it. It's a bunch of freelance writing jobs that are just taking contracts as they come and go. And it kind of sounds like what I moved into now. It's kind of cool to see this and hear about somebody who's considerably more successful at this than I am, actually starting off and doing these things. It's sort of like reading about one of the pioneers of the industry, or something along those lines. I might be making a little bit too much out of this than what it really is, but that's kind of the way I felt while I was reading this. And then we get a few stories about just how things can go well and how things can go kind of bad while you're working with these different companies. Because when you're writing a strategy guide, you're usually at the mercy of what the game company has at that particular point. So if you're working on a game, you're working on the guide for it, and they change the build, then that changes your guide. So if you're working in Alpha 1 or something like that, and you're playing along and all of a sudden they recalibrate all of the stats for the characters and everything, that might cause you to go all the way back to 0 when you're doing this, or it might, cause some other weird thing to happen while you're writing your guide. Doug also brings up an occasion where somebody wasn't exactly giving him the information that he needed. So he would ask for certain things from the companies. Sometimes they were very forthcoming. They would give him what he needed. And in one instance, the guy just never responded to any of Doug's emails. And it made the situation kind of hard to really work with. It's very interesting to see that, where you have a business that I know their job is to make a game, but they've signed a contract to make a strategy guide for it. And you have to think that the company's making money off the strategy guide. The strategy guide is in some way promotional material for the game, because maybe someone hasn't really seen the game at the time. They might see the guide for it, check the guide out, and then buy the game, or something along those lines. I might be overthinking this a bit, but that would be my kind of interpretation of some of these guides. And if you're not making a complete guide or the best guide that you can make, and you're being hampered by the company, it seems weird to me. He also brings up some of the censorship that you might have to deal with from some of the companies while you're writing these guides. Because you have to remember, you don't want to necessarily spoil major plot points for people, but you also might have a company that says you can't include certain things in the game. Like you can't have certain words, like you can't have kill in there. You can't have certain plot might not have, or not plot points, but you don't want them to know like the locations of all the major items. They might not want like all the secrets in the games or anything like that. So you might not be able to write a complete version of the guide, but you might have to deal with like certain limitations and that kind of stuff. And that can be frustrating as a writer, because you want to write the best guide that you can, and in some cases you have to deal with the limitations that are put on you from not only your own company, the way they want you to write, but also from the game developer, the people that you're working with, you're partnering with. And that can be kind of hard to do, and I like the way Doug kind of navigates that, and he explains some of the harder parts to it, and he sort of walks you through how he got around those things. Or he just kind of talks about how it was annoying. And either way, it's pretty cool to read about. Before I really read this, I had a few questions that I had, sort of just about the economics and the business side of making guides. And a lot of that had to do with, why do they make so many guides? Or why did they make so many guides? I thought back to the times when I would go into, Electronics Boutique or into GameStop, and I would see like racks of Madden or NHL or MLB strategy guides. And I would just think to myself, why do those exist? Like, why would you make a guide for a sports game? Because you would think the person who is going to buy it bought the one the previous year, and the strategies aren't going to be too different. So what's different between the guide that you're buying this year and the one that you bought last year? And also, why would you buy a guide for it? It seems kind of unnecessary. And Doug kind of answers those. He gets into why certain games got guides when they really didn't need them, or when the game wasn't going to be all that popular. It would be kind of a business deal. The company would say, we'll give you Final Fantasy, but you need to take like these other guides as well for games that we know aren't going to be all that popular, or are just kind of going to be throwaways and one-offs. But we want you to make guides for them because it might help the sales of the game or something like that. And you need to take all of this crap in order to get, Final Fantasy whatever, or something along those lines. I can't really think of like another game that a company would do that for. I'm sure you can find like some examples or something like that, like a new Star Wars game. We'll give you the new Star Wars game, but you need to take on like these 7 or 8 guides that are just absolute garbage, and we know you're going to lose money on them, but you'll probably be able to make up that money on this bigger license. The last big question I had about it was just on the workflow of actually designing these different guidebooks. like how they would divide things up, like who was doing the single player campaign, who would do the multiplayer campaign. Would you actually have it set up that way? How do you grab screenshots of the games? How do you actually write it? Are you just kind of being rather clinical and technical in your writing? Or are you trying to add something different, like actually make the guide your own or make the text your own, that sort of thing? Most of that question got answered, particularly on style. That did not get answered, but he did talk about how in certain games where you have a multiplayer mode that's a larger chunk of the game, you would have players that would do that. You would have a separate person that would go in, or you would kind of press gang other people into helping you with the multiplayer mode. He talks about how some of that was done, especially on Gears of War, where it seemed like the whole team, like the development team, was helping with multiplayer. It just seemed that it depended on the game, that sort of thing. And it depended on, the access that you were allowed to the game, how much of it you were actually, allowed to get into, and that kind of stuff. Doug provides a lot of insight into just how everything was done and how you would go about writing, an actual guidebook. It's a really interesting book that I hope more people go out and read, especially if you're into like this particular thing about video games. Strategy guides are something that doesn't really get brought up a whole lot. Most people just kind of focus on the games, and they don't necessarily focus on the literature and the other stuff that kind of surrounds them. And then we kind of get to the sad part of the book, the part that I think everybody that read this knew was coming, and the people who haven't read it probably know it's coming. And that's sort of how the internet took over writing guides and how it just rapidly changed. And Doug talks about that, how in, I want to say like 2014 or 2015, he went to get his assignments from Brady, and they were kind of talking about, hey, we don't know if this is going to be around too much longer. And shortly after that, Brady merged with Prima, so it was one big company that was making guidebooks. And they were trying to do stuff to make it more, to make it more, oh gosh, sorry about this, to actually make it a better value to the people who were buying it. Because they really just kind of went by the wayside by, different websites like Twitch or YouTube or different vlogs that could, or blogs, sorry, that could just put out a guide faster than you can actually write a book. Because when you think about it, you can get like a day one release, and there'll be somebody on Twitch playing it, and they can you can actually interact with that person and have more of a conversation with them when they're going through and playing this. And with a guidebook, you don't really have that. It's a little bit more isolating than just going online and finding a video or finding a Twitch stream and that sort of thing. And oftentimes they add more of an entertainment value than something that that a strategy guide can't really give you. So yeah, the internet kind of killed the strategy guide books, and it's kind of a shame, but at the same time, I wasn't one that really used a whole lot of strategy guides when I was growing up, and I don't really use too many of them now. It sort of depends on the game that I'm playing. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about Doug Walsh's The Walkthrough. It's a really great book. It's a pretty short one. It's a quick read, and yeah, there's a lot of really great information in there. So that's gonna wrap things up, guys. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Also, if you like this format of me just kind of talking over stock footage, or if you want me to do it where I talk over a game or something, please let me know if you prefer that than to seeing me on camera talking about these things. I don't think this is going to be a permanent thing, but we'll see. If people like it, I'll stick with it. Anyway, I will talk to you all later. Bye.